everybody, and welcome to Fraudible, the video podcast that brings together academics and practitioners and to discuss all things fraud. In this episode, we're going to be discussing crime in crypto, and I'm delighted to be joined by practitioner Aidan Larkin and researcher Erica Stanford. And thank you very much, guys, for joining me today. Erica, would you mind giving a brief introduction into you and your work, please?
Sure. So hi, thanks for having me on Festival, Claire. So I'm Erica Stanford. I work at a law firm, CMS, so we've got a big crypto practice, so I co-lead that. I wrote a book about crypto scams called Crypto Wars, Fake Dash, Missing Billions and Industry Disruption. So I spent a lot of time on forums run by scammers, chat rooms run by scammers, having interesting WhatsApp and Signal conversations in police HQs, being shown interesting things and all of the rest that goes with that. I occasionally lecture at work business school on crypto and digital assets, and started a big crypto community and write a weekly newsletter called Crypto Carrier, which goes into the main things and shenanigans that go on in the industry. So yeah, I've been working in this space for a while.
Excellent, thank you very much. Aidan?
Hi, Aidan Larkin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Asset Reality. We're the seized asset company. We help governments and enforcement agencies recover, manage, seize, liquidate, all things with the ill-gotten gains, the instrumentalities of crime, the things that we want to take off the bad guys effectively. We hear a lot about the asset recovery sector, but there hasn't been a big focus on the recovery part of asset recovery, and many agencies and many practitioners have to rely on just spreadsheets and legacy systems. So we basically developed a bunch of tools to make it easier for them to seize assets quicker. And that background is because I was in law enforcement previously as a criminal tax inspector in revenue and customs. Don't cheer every time you mention you used to work for the tax man. It always real conversation killer, I noticed, when you used to work at HMRC. But we did really good work there, using civil investigation powers to go after the big criminals where you couldn't get the criminal offence, like the Al Capone effect. So that sort of brought me into the world of being part of an investigation team that led to asset seizures, and then using the private sector like receivers and insolvency practitioners and freezing orders, and seeing that side of the fence. And then I flipped to a company called Wilson's Auctions, which managed many of the UK and Europe's sort of big seizures for government agencies. And during that process of actually being the asset manager, I accidentally stumbled upon one of the first crypto seizures in the UK and was involved in that. And then we did the same with the Belgian forces. So I got a bit of an early insight to what it was like to seize crypto. And then that led me on a bit of a merry dance around the world with the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime and a few other agencies sharing best practice. And as I sort of traveled around and met a guy called Nick Furno, who wrote the book Investigating Cryptocurrency, that Erica has now been heavily involved in the second version, and we all know each other effectively. And the idea for Asset Reality was born because there wasn't a company dedicated to helping sort of governments and enforcement agencies with the seizure part. So I'm very much the practitioner in this conversation. Eric is the one that's going to say all the smart things, but I have a lot of very practical experience in doing those seizures, managing the cars, the boats, the planes, the yachts, and obviously the crypto assets that makes up such a big part of this industry, because most crimes are committed to get assets and acquire wealth, bar crimes of passion. If you take the money out of it, there won't be as much crime. There won't be a problem in laundering if we don't have all of these illicit assets. So our mission is about just trying to make the current asset recovery sector much more effective.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So despite you claiming that Erica's going to give the really intelligent answers, I'm going to ask you a very difficult question, Aidan. What in short is cryptocurrency? Can you define it in a simple-ish way?
How many hours do I have to get through this? It's a great question, and it's something that people have not debated, but people have butchered the description of what it is for so long and miscategorized and misaligned. And I think it's because it is too broad. We almost need to step back. It's like saying, what is technology? Like, what is, even the internet is specific outside of technology. And I think that when people talk about crypto, if you're confused, you should be, because unless you are a practicing sort of an academic or someone who's doing this every day and is exposed to everything all the time, which I'm not, for the avoidance of doubt, I'm on the periphery of sort of this sector in terms of crypto, pure crypto. It should be confusing. It is an industry that's less than 10 years old. Imagine being involved in the first version of aviation in its first 10 years, explaining to people, I'm going to put a big metal thing in the sky and it's going to fly through the air. People, you'd be separated between skeptics, people thinking you're insane, people thinking it's all a scam. And I think when you think about crypto, the most important thing to do is position yourself as that, what are you trying to understand? If you're thinking about, if I'm a practitioner in financial crime, what is crypto to me? Well, crypto to me is an asset category that is likely to be laundered.
Right.
The actual underneath of the cryptography securing assets on a decentralized ledger, again, it's important if you're interested, but I don't need to be a gemologist to know that a diamond can be used to launder proceeds of crime. Yeah. I don't need to be a gemologist. I don't need to know the mining process of a diamond to know that if a sanctioned oligarch has €1 million diamond and someone wants to freeze that or seize it, and I also then don't need all my gemological certifications to know that I probably shouldn't put it in the desk drawer. I probably should put it somewhere safe, and maybe I should get an expert opinion. So I sometimes think people sort of lose their mind because they don't understand what crypto is. And it also sounds like I'm also dodging the answer, but let's be clear. My favorite description is the description that obviously that I'm biased towards Nick's description. But when you think about, actually the best description I would recommend people go and look at, sorry, Nick, one of the best descriptions I like, there is a BBC video. It's on YouTube, and it is literally how do cryptocurrencies work. And it is a man and a penguin. And trust me when I say I have shared that link more times around the world with people after lectures, because the way they describe it as, we all move value about. I give £1 to Erica. Erica has a ledger. I have a ledger. It's called a bank statement. Erica doesn't have to trust me. I don't have to trust Erica, but she trusts my NatWest account, or I trust her Nationwide account. But if you take out that centralized person, who do you trust in the middle? And the only way you can do that was the creation of this blockchain decentralized ledger. Right. So it's a glorified bank statement that doesn't require one person to trust. Yeah. Basically, everybody has a copy of the same ledger all around the world. And it's never been broken. It's never been... but I think even people knowing that, that's very different, because there's different types of blockchains. And it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And again, it's like me saying to you, describe the internal combustion engine process. Unless you have an advanced engineering or mechanical engineering degree, it's not going to make sense to you anyway. If I try and, so I do think that people dive into it, and I often ask them, what are you trying to understand? Do you want comfort that it's an asset that you can trace and seize? Happy to say it's probably the easiest in the world to trace and the easiest in the world to seize. Give me a Bitcoin over a boat every day of the week. But it's also a bit of a tightrope. If it goes wrong, there isn't someone to call. There isn't the bank to say. And again, we can get into the nuances of how it's stored. If it's actually controlled through a centralized exchange, that's like having your money in a bank. So I'm not seizing it from you, I'm seizing it from the bank. But we can get into the weeds of that. But for me, when I think about crypto, I'm always forcing people to consider, what is your perspective on it? What is it you're trying to get out of this? And if you want to know, I need to know about crypto because it's being laundered, well, then you need to know how it moves around and how it's transacted around the world. What are the data points and how can you get information? If you're someone if you're a victim of a scam, you want to know, how do I start a recovery process or an attempted recovery process to get my assets back? If you're a regulator, you want to know, how can I monitor it in my jurisdiction? So I think the first thing people need to do is respect the size of the sector. And I'll shut up. I'll hand over to Erica. But lastly, the reason we're all so confused is that the world doesn't agree on what this is right now. I mean, you have to remember that virtual assets, virtual currency, crypto assets, cryptocurrency, even between governments, we can't agree what to call it. Digital assets thrown the fifth, and then crypto is just used as a bit of a generic catch-all. So we don't have a set language for it globally. We don't have a set regulatory framework globally. We have the intergovernmental body FATF that sets out suggestions on how you can develop an effective program. But I think at the last reading, like 75% of countries in the world still don't have a fully effective program in place. So again, super, super early days, but it can be investigated, it can be seized, it can be traced, it can be managed, it can be monitored. A lot of the things you can't do easily with cars, boats and planes. So for me, from this podcast perspective and your listeners, I think we should be talking about what's possible with crypto, because we truly can monitor and manage and do things that we simply couldn't do with a big painting or cash, for example.
Sure. I mean, out of all of the things that I thought would be raised in this podcast, I did not expect penguins to come up. But hey,
I'm always about penguins. Yeah.
Absolutely. Erica, any thoughts?
No, I mean, I think Aidan is, completely right. And I guess for listeners, we had a nice debate as to who would answer that question. And I'm glad that I won and it went to Aidan. So thanks Aidan for that. It's digital money. It's money where you can track who gets what. And one of the things in crypto, and an interesting thing is, if, say, I don't know, Claire, you're scamming me and I send you Bitcoin, I fall for your scam and I send you Bitcoin, you can see where that Bitcoin goes and then what happens to it after. What happens when you've moved it on. So that brings a lot of traceability. But it's a digital asset. It's digital money. And I think one of the shames in crypto, there's just so much focus on, either the crime side or price of Bitcoin's gone up to X, instead of looking at what it's really cool about. And when Aidan mentioned it was created so that you don't have to trust Aidan, but you also don't have to trust the bank. You don't have to depend upon the bank in the middle, which is, phenomenal.
Yeah.
And remember that's the thing for listeners. I mean, the whole point of this, like, again, people sort of lose their mind because they, Satoshi Nakamoto and this unknown entity created this and put it into the wild. Like, I remember people using WhatsApp for 2 or 3 years before anyone even knew where it came from, whoever sent them the first link to it, and people were merrily, firing sensitive messages and photographs back and forward. And like, who owns this? No idea. Who owned TikTok for the first couple of years of its ownership, and where was your data? And the face swap apps that people use, going, like, you do realise that's probably the state-sponsored data collection, and you're just merrily going, access all my contacts, access all my photographs. I want to see what my dog looks like in 40 years. Like, and all of a sudden, then people get really skeptical and lots of scrutiny when it comes towards something that doesn't require trust.
Yeah.
And I often think as well with these sectors, and I'm not a crypto bro by any sense of the imagination. I'm not a big holder of any significant assets. I play around and figure out how they work. Like that's about the height of it. But I do think that there is this, like, them and us with the sector, and instead of just looking at the underlying technology. I mean, the billion or so people that are unbanked in the world, if you live in a country with hyperinflation and you're sending value around the world, you're losing 20% to Western Union or something.
I was just gonna sorry, Aidan. I was just gonna say exactly that. So many people have to rely on banks and governments and economics, and it isn't fair values to play. But also, one of my favorite use cases of crypto is I always go on about it. It's a social enterprise. It's called Plastic Bank, but it's totally gone massive in Asia and many poorer countries as people get there's no incentive otherwise to pick up waste plastic that's thrown around. So you've got loads of people now that go around and pick up plastic, and what happened? They used to get paid cash. Well, that's useless. These aren't people that have got bank accounts. Cash is useless. It was mostly women that go to pick up the plastic. So men would know where they would get paid, would wait around the corner, and as soon as they get paid cash, would mug them, would steal it.
Yeah.
And now if they've got a thing, they get a digital wallet, they get the money sent to them digitally, it's sort of pegged to the local currency, and they can swap it straight away for food or school food or school fees or whatever, and they don't get mugged anymore. And even if the phone or whatever that you've got your digital wallet gets taken, that doesn't matter. You can still access your funds, and you can pay people money fairly, and you don't have to worry about that money getting stolen or that money getting forged, for example. So yeah, of course there's a lot of theft and so go on in crypto, but also the whole way that the technology works stops a whole load of crime and protects a whole load of people that otherwise wouldn't be able to save money digitally at all.
It is, and it's you mentioned that. You've reminded me of like the when we saw that first sort of like flight of people after the sort of the Russian invasion. I remember one of those sort of poignant images, and there was a guy with a QR code tattooed on the inside of his elbow, and it was basically a backup for his crypto wallet, because he knew going through all the various borders and things like that, and whatever would happen to him, how he could steal his wealth. And you forget that is that just virtual safety deposit box in the sky, basically, that can hold your stuff. And again, that all seems conceptually mind bending, but then I can use my own mum and dad as an example, going, oh, I don't get Bitcoin. So, but do you put photographs on Facebook to share with your family overseas? Yeah. So you take a picture that you've just taken in your living room, you press a button on your phone, it goes into a cloud somewhere, and someone can see it somewhere else in the world. Like, or you send a message, or you're on Zoom talking to somebody. Conceptually, it's exactly the same, except there just isn't a private company controlling your stuff, but it's still up there in the cloud. And when I think about the Bitcoin, Bitcoin is the one that took off. I mean, there's been iterations of attempts to do this, like some sort of digital asset, digital cash has been around for decades. There's been people trying this in the 70s and 80s and early 90s. I forget what the other one was called, hash something. And I'll dig it out. But there was various iterations. It's kind of like lots of people tried to get a mobile phone off the ground. But the technology hadn't caught up. Or the infrastructure hadn't caught up. And what was really unique about Bitcoin is that the creators, when they launched it, they launched the infrastructure as well. They launched the engine for which it can run on, which was the blockchain. This blockchain has lots of other different use cases as well. Like day in, day out, we'll see in years to come that when you sell your house, the deeds of your house will just be baked into your local no solicitors blockchain network, for example. And they can go, yeah, Claire's moving house. We checked all the deeds of her house a couple of years ago. It's all good. It's all there. So there's lots of other use cases as to how you can use the underlying technology. And again, when people sort of lose their minds over crypto assets, like, well, don't buy them then. I don't lose my mind as much as I probably should over YouTube influencers with £5 bottles of lemonade. And I'm going, I just don't take part in that market. Like, why would Michael Jordan's trainers be worth $2 million? Why is Kanye West trainers worth $1 million? Why does Marilyn Monroe's dress sell for $1 million? If you don't get it, don't take part. You don't. There's this thing that people forcing Bitcoin down people's throats. It's an entirely opt-in community.
But I think the problem isn't the forcing Bitcoin in people's throats. It's as you say, there's pump and dumps, there's influences, and that is one of the biggest problems in the space. Sort of crime almost society, because there's always going to be North Korean state-sponsored hackers. There's always going to be other government state-sponsored hackers. That's not going to change. There's nothing we can ever do. But
we talked about this before. It's not. Everyone thinks that crypto and crime are the two. It's we've been merrily laundering fiat cash for decades. We've been merrily laundering real estate proceeds
and also the quantities of fiat cash laundered through traditional high street banks
that have been around for decades and
have been around for a long time and don't get across. So there's always going to be traditional crime. I think, in my opinion, one of the biggest problems in crypto is as Aidan touched on, it's the whole YouTubers or TikTokers or whatever saying buy this meme coin, buy this thing, knowing that they've already bought a load of it when it was low, knowing that they'll have sold out before anybody else. They're the only ones that benefit, and there's so much noise on social media, and that's how so many people lose money, and a lot of money, and it's people that probably don't have the money to lose, and that's something that we could really act on. Like that is something that in the West governments could act on and could stop.
Yeah, and there have been, like, the reports are eye-watering. I mean, like, the scam figures are in the billions now that's being lost. But again, I keep going back to the point of, like, there has to be, let's separate out things like, you know, the pig butchering and the targeted attacks, which are very, very sophisticated social engineering attacks that target someone to extract wealth from them. There's also a lot of people that end up just nosediving into scams because they just, you know, click a link they shouldn't have, or they open something on their phone they shouldn't have. And despite how many times people are told, do not click on the unsolicited text message that asks you to enter in your information, for example, people still do it. And I think that it's the supply and demand of sort of criminal activity. And you have these pump and dump schemes and others because it's not regulated. Like, no, criminals and people who want to take advantage will just look for the next space to sort of, like, I was just reading this morning that the number one stolen asset right now in Spain is olive oil, because olive oil is up so much. It was like €5 a litre, now it's €14 a litre, and it's literally organised. It's like the avocados with the cartels. It's like any asset that can be shipped. And then if you put in something like crypto, that, and I think that's the bit that the listeners need to understand. We're in this sort of perverse situation where the most traceable asset in the world is being used to launder proceeds of crime, even though they know it's traceable, infinitely traceable, and that you can sit now, and we've seen some of the big billion-dollar seizures in the US where they've got someone like 4 years after the event because that last bit of evidence has fallen in and it's sort of connected them to the murder weapon, effectively, to the smoking gun. But criminals are doing it because no one's looking. It's not that it's not. So when I hear people talking about, like, crypto crime, well, it's not a Ferrari crime if your Ferrari gets stolen. It's not a Rolex crime if your Rolex gets stolen. It's crime. It's just this asset category is very volatile, very noisy in the press right now. And it's almost like it's the low-hanging fruit for criminals. But it is very genuine. I mean, the stats are like that the entire North Korean, like, you know, nuclear proliferation is funded by Bitcoin theft and ransomware. Like, it's not a small issue. It is not a, we should not be paying attention to this. Like, it's terrifying when you think of the scale. But I also think on the other side that a lot of it is very, very avoidable by people just, I don't go to a modern art gallery to buy modern art because the guy promises me that this is the next big thing. So I don't know modern art, so I don't participate in that market. And the amount of people with no crypto experience, no digital asset experience, buying NFTs and buying nothing, go, why did you buy that? Well, he promised me 100x returns. And going, you're the type of person that buys timeshares. Like, it's there has to be some social, like, personal responsibility for going. And again, I disclaim that with that is very different than the people that are socially engineered, manipulated, and exploited. But there is an element of, I think, people who run venture capital funds that, like, click on this thing, and I think there's just a casual attitude to they've made 100x on their portfolio, so they don't mind losing a bit. Sometimes they don't mind. There's just that there's a higher appetite for risk, I think, in crypto, and it's easy for people to pick on it and say it's the scary thing. But I think we should separate out the technology, and Eric hit on it earlier on. I mean, we don't demonize cash in the same way, yet with all of the controls that have been in place in decades and billions spent on compliance every year globally, we still have quite a weak enforcement regime globally. Like, you guys will probably know more than me on this sector, but could you count on two hands how many people in banking has been prosecuted for money laundering offences? I can count more people in crypto that have been prosecuted. So I do think that the new kid on the block is quite rightly being held to account. But, like, there isn't parity between Danske, what happened with the Danske prosecutions, like, you know, HSBC blatantly changing records to avoid sanctions to help the Sinaloa cartel, like, launder money, like, and then HSBC is still the main sponsor of, like, no, Heathrow Terminal 5. Like, if that was FTX, it'd be tore down the same day. But it's like, oh well, it wasn't. There's never. Banks do a really good job, and I'm not picking on banks, but I don't think we compare the two sectors evenly. It's like there's a corporate responsibility, but you can't lock up a corporation. We don't have the same accountability, whereas we're very good at finding accountability in crypto. Like, it's the individuals. We talk about the individuals, Zong and Daquan. We talk about Sam Bankman-Fried. We talk about, I guarantee most normal people wouldn't know the chief executives or the people who were running the shop in HSBC and Danske during all those billion-dollar like criminal cases. Not alleged, criminal. Found guilty, pled guilty, found no tune me. Like Netflix documentaries about it. But we don't talk about them. But we all know Sam Bankman-Fried. You know, we all know CZ. We all know. Yeah. So, what do you think, Eric? Is it on the block?
I think that there's 2 points. I mean, completely right. There's a lot more drama about, you know, big crypto problems, but that pale in significant to traditional banking. I mean, two things. If I'm going to buy drugs off Aidan, it's not going to be in Bitcoin. It's going to be in cash next time he's in London.
Or a nice watch, or a painting.
Or
another way to do it, isn't it?
One of the yachts that you mentioned earlier, I'll take that. So, I think one problem though in crypto is, and I often get criticised for hating on Tether. It's a big stable coin, and you know, various issues with it aside. One of the things I keep hearing how easy it is to cash out of this one particular stable coin into cash, no questions asked, no ID taken, and around the world. Moscow's a big haven for it. Cyprus, there's lots of places where you've got kind of exchange desks where you can literally go in with Tether and walk out with a sack of cash. And that makes it easier to cash out.
Tell people the difference between Bitcoin and a stable coin.
Right, okay. So one difference between Bitcoin and a stable coin is that stable coins are in theory pegged to a dollar or a fiat currency, and the in theory is a big crucial bit there. So there's a few key differences. The way Bitcoin, for example, works is there's a finite number of Bitcoins that are ever produced. You can't produce more Bitcoin, so you always
just like gold or diamonds. There's only so much in the Earth's crust,
right. Whereas Tether, for example, as one of the stable coins, there's no limit on how many can be produced. So there's been about 100 billion printed in recent years. There also isn't the proof of what they're backed by, which is a considerable issue. There's been several legal challenges around that to get the proof of what they are or what they aren't backed by.
It's actually banned. It's banned in New York, isn't it? It's banned in New York State.
Yeah. There's been several sort of legal challenges around it, and been how it's banked and associations with money laundering and so on and so forth. But one of the features of Tether, because it has more or less held its peg to the dollar, it's easier to cash out and it's more readily used in crime. So when you sort of speak to or hear from the main criminals using crypto to cross borders, Bitcoin is volatile and it's traceable, whereas Tether doesn't have the volatility. It's less traceable, and as you say, you've got these exchanges where you can cash out into literal cash, no questions asked. So if you're going to convert, if you're going to do crime in crypto, and if you're going to cash out, that's a problem. That's a step that has to be. Aidan, if you could solve that one.
No, I think, but I think it's even right to keep doubling down on it, because I think that like the average person on the street won't get like the major differences. I mean, if you talk about something like Bitcoin, and that is the unique case. Now, Bitcoin is this decentralized thing that exists on a ledger. There's nobody at the wheel. It's the community that operates it effectively. It's like an open source piece of software. There's no one personally benefiting. There's no holding company that you can go, hey, Bitcoin owner, Bitcoin.org, we want you to do X, Y, and Z. And people forget that. People just take all crypto as being the same. Whereas if you look at something like, and I agree with Eric, I find it astonishing. I truly do. Like, it's something like Tether, like the figures they've posted for profits, they're in like Charles Schwab, JP Morgan, like, they're in that sort of level of like billions in a quarter, like that sort of level of profitability, or maybe revenue, maybe it is, but like huge player. Like, they literally affect the dollar value globally because people want access to the dollar.
And arguably the Bitcoin value, but which is probably a lesser of an issue. But
it's separating the two things out to be one is a instrument that was created by a private company with a very purposely opaque corporate structure to begin with, and it's changed hands a few times over the years. But initially, the people that some of the early people involved in Tether had criminal records and were made bankrupt or part of failed sort of venture funds and things. Like it wasn't the type of thing that if you led with all of that and then said, "Will you give me your money?" You'd be like, no. Whereas now it's just come under that cloud of Bitcoin and crypto and things like Tether. And you go, no.
Different,
massively different. Like you simply can't compare the two things. They that it's sort of apples and oranges. So I think that, and that's the bit that people sort of fall into that trap. And Eric is right. There should be greater accountability for these things. We should treat them all with the same level of skepticism. Who's behind it? What's their intentions? Where are they regulated? What's the oversight to all of these? Because if I set up the Erica and Aidan stablecoin today, and I tell you that it's 1-to-1 pegged to the pound,
and then you create 100 billion of them.
Yeah, and who checks? And who's your auditor? It's like, it's okay. I've got a good auditor. I've got an auditor who's in the big four.
And I've got a good bank.
Or the top 8.
And we'll see you if you say we're not.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're like, right. But haven't auditors, like every time I open the FT, I see yet another auditor convicted of sort of fudging numbers. Like, no, auditors aren't perfect. It's went wrong. But at least as long as you understand that private company, I'm selling a timeshare. You're trusting me as the person selling. Whereas something like Bitcoin, or when people talk about DeFi, and that's for a different episode, that's a software protocol. You do what you want with it. It's like email. You can't hold email to account for someone sending a bad email.
Right.
It's a piece of technology. Whereas if I'm a private company making money off that, like an internet service provider, I should have guide rails as an on and off ramp. Yeah. So I think it's separating out those two, but I do think that we've got lazy as a global community, just sort of crypto crime and just lumping it all in. It is a tiny percentage of assets that are tracked as illicit. I will put the big caveat in, and I'm pretty confident Eric agrees with me. The industry can also whitewash itself a little bit as well. So when the industry says it's only a tiny percentage that is illicit, because we've tracked all of the data on chain, but that's the on chain data. Yeah. The off chain is probably the bigger part of the iceberg.
Yeah, and people don't report. A lot of people don't report when they've had crypto stolen or when they're subject to a hack because either they're embarrassed or they just don't think it's worthwhile or so.
I did a commentary on this actually recently, and I used the example of if you take every burglary that was actually reported to the police yesterday in London, would you be confident that that was the sum total of all burglaries? And when you only look at on-chain data and give a commentary on that, and I think the analytic companies do a good job of saying, like, this is on-chain only, but then what happens is the press grab it and go, only 0.34% of all Bitcoin activity is illicit. It's absolutely certain that 0.34 is illicit, and you have no idea what the rest of the other side of the iceberg is on that. So I think on that point, it's still significantly the percentage of fiat known to be used in crime is 2 point something. So it's still significantly lower as a percentage. It's 100%. It's 100% better than I think actually I'm often sort of using the example of the very fact that we can measure it means it's in a better position than fiat. Whereas fiat right now, the world has just sort of slightly given up and just went 2 to 5% of GDP. Now, what's a couple of trillion between friends? We kind of don't know anymore what the illicit, what the potential sort of laundered amount is in fiat globally. But at least with crypto and digital assets, we can tighten the net. But again, as Erica said, I pull out things like stable coins. And there are some stable coins that play ball with government regulators, are very transparent about how they run and how they operate and take part. And there's other stable coins that simply aren't worth the digital asset they're printed on. And people will find out the hard way. And some of these things, like, for example, I'm not going to name a certain stable coin, but if it just stopped tomorrow and all of the owners just extracted the massive amount of value and it collapsed, it would have serious economic ramifications for the world. And there wouldn't be anyone anywhere that could go, Well, where was the regulator? What regulator?
Yeah.
If they're not in the jurisdiction that has a regulatory regime for stablecoins, and it'd be even better, they probably haven't even broken the law.
Right.
Like, that's the thing. If I ask you to give me $1 billion and loan out your pension pot, you give me $1 billion of your pension pot, and I literally do it on hopes and dreams that I'm going to launch a successful solo album, and I spend my $1 billion on my solo album that all pans, and all your pension holders, like, where the hell's our money? Can't sue me.
And the worst thing is, I know which stablecoin Aidan's referring to, and probably everybody in the industry knows which stablecoin Aidan's referring to, and it's frustrating that nothing is done and that the investigations aren't done, and yet so much money is entrusted to these platforms with, as we said before, no accountability. And it's not like with Bitcoin, where you can see the technology and you can see how it works. You don't have that. And
So
I think so that I'm not just stomping on stablecoins. What is encouraging in a perfect world, if and the whole point of stablecoins, as Erica said, it's volatility. If you want to interact with digital assets, but you don't want to have to work out, we've seen Bitcoin move from like $72,000 to $62,000 in days. You couldn't run a business. If you buy a Tesla for one Bitcoin, for example, by the time the order comes in, you've either made a massive profit or you still owe them more money, or they've lost money. It's just not a possible way to do business. So things like stablecoins at least allow you to insert some certainty, but have all the benefits of a blockchain transaction. So
there's definitely value to it. I mean, I'd be interested in it. I used to live in South America, and
hyperinflation,
and you see the consequences of it. And I think one of the things
you'll be telling me my Dogecoin isn't a good investment, Erica.
Well, it depends what country you're living in. And I think one of the things is that, privileged people sat in London or South Wales or whatever, you can, add things to your Amazon cart and press buy now and tap things with your iPhone. We're not really the target market.
Yeah, it wasn't built for us, and I think that's the fundamental. We talked about the unbanked at the beginning. Unless you've experienced that, if you've lived in Beirut where you can try and withdraw cash and the bank can just go, no, not today. It's not happening today. People forget that I've spent a lot of time working as a UNODC consultant, and I got to work across Africa extensively, and it's just common. I mean, mobile money is just a normal thing. People are literally topping up the equivalent of their Vodafone account and sending $200 to someone for payment for goods and services, through tech. That's how I'm a majority, because we're not trusting the state bank. Absolutely not in certain jurisdictions. So again, once you realize that was the intended use case, it's good to see that it's moving into being an asset category. Like the Bitcoin, and again, I used to be faced with a lot of naysayers when I was doing these talks in sort of 2018 and 2019. It's now the stats have our back. Like the Bitcoin ETF is the most successful ETF in history. Conversation's finished. It's done better than gold, done better than silver, done better. So is there a global commercial appetite? But yes, because there's massive profits potentially. What bank isn't going to go for a thing that it's exactly the reason they exist, is to generate profits for shareholders? Of course, this is going to be around. But I do think what is a travesty is that there are opportunities, things like stable coins, where they can freeze and blacklist accounts. So we have seen some good successes with stable coins where victims have said, hey, this group is the ones no laundering all the proceeds. So stable coin issuances are good that way. And you would hope that with things like central bank digital currencies, if they become a thing, not just really governments. And I think when they become a thing at some point in the future, it's just the time is when. Of course, a government would want to issue benefit payments on a central ledger that they control, because then they can track things easier. Taxation, tax avoidance, all of those things go away. But I think you'll have the big privacy argument. But the thing I was going to say at the very top of the call was all of the things we're talking about as the virtues of digital assets have always been available, but only to the socially elite. Offshore banking, corporate structures, being able to have your account in an offshore Caribbean jurisdiction and having a numbered Swiss bank account, for example.
Or even being able to store money safely or being able to get a loan.
Access to credit. All of these things, it's they've been around for years. I was a criminal investigator. The Maillet case took 20 years from start to finish because of corporate layers, because of complexity. And FTX was 12 to 24 months. Now, there's no doubt with FTX, you had cooperating sort of accomplices who turned on each other. but they turned on each other because the data was just like, we've all your Slack messages, all your WhatsApp messages, all your blockchains on. It's like someone turning up with blood all over their hands and CCTV and like their Apple Watch, and you were at the crime scene. Like there was nowhere to go. So I disagree with a lot of people that said that went quickly because of the accomplices. No, it became because of the blockchain related data and what that ecosystem and infrastructure and just technology in general. It just became, there was no debate. Whereas it took those couple of people years to lobby to get the Madoff case just looked at. But because you couldn't get through all these corporate veils, it was impossible for anyone to So there's what I would leave your listeners with. Imagine a Madoff case versus an FTX case or a big crypto scam case. If I go to you as law enforcement 20 years ago and I say, I think this guy Madoff is up to something, here's his account number that I sent my funds to. It's like, oh, that's offshore. You can't even get moving. I had to open a case, open a file, send off an international request. It could be 6 months, could be a year before I even see what has happened in that one account. And if I see that one account and everything gets swept out at the end of the month into another account, I need to get that account. Look at FTX or look at any of the big scam cases. I can type in the address on a blockchain ledger
and see exactly where I went.
And you say, I give this guy £100,000, and I can go, heck, he's actually received 10 million in the last 3 days. This is a monster case, and people can move quickly. So I think that the technology is an overall force for good in terms of financial crime, but people need training, people need resources, people need to know what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I liken it to like the automotive industry. Cars first came out, these big metal boxes were flying down roads, killing people and killing drivers. And then eventually we have speed limits, we have airbags, we have safety standards, we have licensing provisions. We then get even more sophisticated and say, hey, probably not a good idea if you're really drunk. Let's not do that. Let's not take no bad prescription medication. All those things took decades to implement. So sometimes I'm sort of a bit of a realist going, there's going to be bumps along the way. This is not going to rapidly, but I think the sector does deserve some credit. Like we're part of the Digital Asset Task Force and the Global Coalition in the fight against financial crime. They're all private sector initiatives. The CFAR group, all these things have come together going, kind of need to self-regulate a little bit. And if we can't wait for governments, everyone lost a lot of time during COVID as well, if I'm being fair to governments. The UK had some brilliant crypto legislation and things, and stuff just couldn't get across the line fast enough. So like as governments catch up, I do think the private sector is doing a good job. Again, credit to our friends in the banks, because Gimlet, things in the UK, there are initiatives that you can copy paste and say, well, that worked for banking. Take a lot of the big characters and personalities in the banking world are now in these same initiatives going, okay, how can we turn this to crypto now? So I do think it's not as black and white of just crypto bad, others good, and there isn't an M in this. There's a great sort of like synergy across all the sectors trying to figure it out. But I'd love to record this in a year's time and sort of see where we are and see if things are any more clear, because I suspect the big positive is crypto seizures are going through the roof. Billions of dollars are being recovered. The UK's just had its first multi-billion pound seizure of crypto. There's never been a multi-billion pound seizure of anything in the UK. So the actual art of the possible is phenomenally encouraging. That money goes back into an asset recovery and incentivization scheme.
Well, I'm hoping that particular money goes back to its victims in China where it belongs. And not stay.
And then you can have the dispute, Well, and that's the next part of the process. The next part of the process is identifying the valid claims. We've seen examples where criminal gangs have laid claims posing as victims as well. And that's where international treaties, things like the Karen network, that the UK is a big part of, and the CPS, is finding out, how do you then validate those claims? We've seen this. Some countries don't have a good... we've seen the big African corruption cases where all the money's sitting in London and the money doesn't get back quick enough. So again, these are asset recovery problems. They're not just crypto problems. So we shouldn't also think that it's all going to be sorted out because it's crypto. It's now going to fall back into the bigger pot, which is for another episode of what are the problems in asset recovery. Because crypto as a digital asset is just a subset within that sort of wider asset recovery piece.
Okay. Erica, closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, no, I mean, as Aidan said, so there's episodes 2, 2 and 3. There's a lot more to it. I think we said before we started filming this, it isn't that crypto is crime, or that everything crypto is a scam, or that if you ban crypto, all of the crime will stop. It won't. It will just be further.
We banned murder and narcotics and all the other bad things. it didn't stop them. Like, bans don't work.
Yeah. It isn't gonna stop it at all. It will just go further underground. So we do have a phenomenal industry here in the technology, and I just think the more we look at the actual use cases and how it can be used and all the many benefits, that's another big thing. And one of the things that we definitely could stop would be some of the social media promotions, and the UK is starting on that. I think there's a lot more to go on that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. That's all we have time for, because I need to wait for Aidan to release his solo album. Very much looking forward to that.
I think that the best line I've heard in a while was, "What's 2 trillions between friends?" So we'll keep to that one. Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, that's all we have time for. I'd like to thank Erica and Aidan for joining me and today to talk about crime in crypto. And thank you very much, guys. My name's Claire Maillet, and this is Fraudible.